By now, you already know that there are no products or security technologies in the world that can detect and block all security threats in this continuously evolving threat landscape, regardless of the vendor, regardless of how expensive this technology is. And this is why many organizations are tasking their senior analyst in their security operations center or in their computer security incident response team to hunt for threats that may have actually bypassed any security controls that are in place within the organization. This is why this concept of threat hunting exists. And threat hunting, in short, is the act of basically proactively looking for threats and searching through the organization to discover, if any of these threats actually could have been bypassing your security controls, your security products, your security technologies out there, right? And whenever I mention no products, that means no firewalls, no intrusion prevention systems or IPS, no data loss prevention systems, no cloud service that will always be perfect, right? And it will be able to detect and block all these threats that we're actually seeing nowadays, right? Now, starting with this hunting process, one thing that I want to highlight is that, at the end of the day, I cannot sugarcoat it. It actually requires a deep knowledge of the network, and it's often performed by SOC analysts. So whenever I say SOC, the Security Operations Center analyst, that may be in an escalation tier, right? Typically, a SOC or a Security Operations Center is divided into 3 different tiers. Tier 1, where the junior analysts reside, a mid-level to senior analyst, tier 2, and then the top tier or a tier 3 senior security analyst. That top tier is where typically threat hunting resides. However, that all depends on the organization and how the organization, how big the organization is, number one. How is it structured, right? And in some cases, actually, large corporations may have a separate team to perform threat hunting, just dedicated for threat hunting, even outside of the analysts that traditionally are in the Security Operations Center. Now, threat hunters assume that an attacker has already compromised the network, right? Subsequently, they actually need to come up with some hypothesis of what is actually compromised, how the adversary could have been performing the attack, what are the tactics, techniques, and procedures, what we call TTPs, that modern attackers use to bypass those security controls. This is why many organizations are actually using things like the MITRE attack framework to be able to learn about the tactics and techniques of adversaries. And in short, the MITRE attack framework covers those tactics and techniques that attackers use in real-life attacks, right? If it is in the MITRE attack framework, it has happened in the real world. It's not a hypothesis, it's not a theory. These are the tactics and techniques that attackers are using to compromise organizations. Now, threat hunting is not the same as the traditional SOC incident response activities, right? Also, it is not the same as vulnerability management, which is a process of patching vulnerabilities, assessing your network and your systems, including cloud-based applications in some cases, to remediate some type of vulnerabilities. In this case, what the threat hunting process does is you come up with a hypothesis, as I mentioned to you before. Typically, the hypothesis is created using some type of information, some type of assumption. And in many cases, that type of information is threat intelligence, right? Probably you're subscribing to a threat intelligence feed that can potentially give you somewhat of an insights what attackers are actually doing in other organizations, and potentially how to detect the indicators of compromise, how to manipulate your systems to be able to hunt, for those threats, and so on, right? Now, threat hunting is not a new concept. Many organizations have performed threat huntings for a long time. However, in the last decade or so, many organizations have recognized that they either have to implement a threat hunting program or enhance their existing program to better defend their organizations, right? Now, there's no size-fits-all threat hunting process. However, there are several common best practices among mature organizations on how to perform this threat hunting process. First, you come up with a hypothesis, and as I mentioned, it can be based on threat intelligence, some internal anomaly, or by just plain intuition. Then you use tools and methodologies to investigate. You move into hopefully, revealing those new patterns and tactics and techniques and procedures, the TTPs from the attackers. And then, hopefully you find the threat and you're able to remediate the threat, and you refine and enrich, the reporting using different types of analytics. And of course, you get that outcome, right? And the lessons learned from it, and you feed it back to your incident response process. So you can actually learn on how in the future you can catch those threats before it, of course, passes your security controls and your security monitoring. Now, the last thing that I want to cover is that you can measure the maturity of your threat hunting program within the organization in many ways. But here I'm showing a high-level matrix that can be used to evaluate the maturity level of your organization against different high-level threat hunting elements. And as you see here, basically you have the threat hunting high-level elements on the left and the threat hunting maturity level across the top, across the matrix here, from initial or minimal, that you basically are just getting started with threat hunting, or level 3, which is an innovative, right, or what we call the leading level, and to the fact that you have a really good mature process to perform threat intelligence. And if you look down the list, especially in level 3, you see the word automation a lot, because automation is crucial for incident response, for threat hunting, for vulnerability management, and all the security operations within your organization. So again, this is just a reference. Again, you can actually measure the maturity of your threat hunting program in many different ways, but this one is a very easy way to basically even look at trends if your threat hunting process is maturing enough, and you can actually claim some success in some areas.
Malware analysis is the study or process of determining the functionality, origin, and potential impact of a given malware sample, such as a virus, worm, Trojan horse, rootkit, or backdoor. Cisco acquired a security company called ThreatGrid that provides cloud-based and on-premises malware analysis solutions. Cisco integrated the Cisco AMP and ThreatGrid to provide a solution for advanced malware analysis with deep threat analytics. The Cisco AMP ThreatGrid integrated solution analyzes millions of files and correlates them with hundreds of millions of malware samples. This provides a look into attack campaigns and how malware is distributed. The solution provides a security administrator with detailed reports of indicators of compromise and threat scores that help prioritize mitigations and recover from attacks. Cisco AMP ThreatGrid crowdsources malware from a closed community and analyzes all samples using highly secure proprietary techniques that include static and dynamic analysis. These are different from traditional sandboxing technologies used in malware analysis. The Cisco AMP ThreatGrid analysis exists outside the virtual environment, identifying malicious code designed to evade analysis. There is a feature in Cisco AMP ThreatGrid called Glovebox that helps you interact with the malware in real time, recording all activity for future playback and reporting. Advanced malware uses numerous evasion techniques to determine whether it is being analyzed in a sandbox. Some of these samples require user interaction. Glovebox dissects these samples without infecting your network while the samples are being analyzed. Glovebox is a powerful tool against advanced malware that allows analysts to open applications and replicate a workflow process, see how the malware behaves, and even reboot the virtual machine. There are different boxes or sandbox implementations for malware analysis. The following are the most popular types. Full system emulation, which simulates the host's physical hardware, including the processor, CPU, and memory, and operating system, to allow you to obtain deep visibility into the behavior and impact of the program being analyzed. Emulation of operating systems, which emulates the host operating system but not the hardware. And virtualized, which are VM-based sandboxes to contain and analyze suspicious programs. Let's take a look at a real-world example of a malware report. We start out in AMP for endpoints, where we can see a collection of sample malware files that have been analyzed by the ThreatGrid malware analysis tool. We start out with analysis, file analysis, then select a sample malware file to look at. This opens up the malware analysis report. If we scroll down in the report, we see the SHA-256 hash of the malware file that was analyzed. From there, we can look up the HTTP traffic that this specific malware has been generating. Next, we can examine the artifacts such as system events and networking. And finally, we will take a look at the actual malware being detonated in the glove box feature of ThreatGrid. This is a very handy feature of the malware analysis tool that allows us to actually see what is happening on the system while the malware is infecting it.
What are threat actors, right? So threat actors, bad actors, or malicious actors, all these are different names that basically mean the same thing. Other folks actually call them attackers, but the industry is actually standardizing in the word or the name threat actor. So the threat actors are individuals or group of individuals that perform an attacks or are responsible for a security incident that impacts or actually has the potential of impacting an organization or an individual, right? So there are several types of threat actors, and here I'm actually including, a few examples. First one is actually script kitties, and these are people who uses assistance scripts, thus the word script kitties, or different tools to actually hack into computers and to networks, and actually, they actually lack the expertise, right, to write their own software, their own exploits. So basically, actually use somebody else's, and you see these very often for either kids nowadays actually launching denial of service attacks, and using specific tools, or individuals that are somewhat quote unquote amateurs, right, that they actually want to perform, either malicious or, an illicit activity using somebody else's script, right? Now, we also have organized crime groups, right? And the main purpose of these groups is actually to steal information, scam people, and make money, right? And there are many different organized crime groups that are, cyber threat actors that make a lot of money nowadays. And this is actually an unfortunate reality that the cyber, economy, what we call the cyber economy, scamming people, stealing information. This means, credit card information, medical records, social security numbers, identity of people, and many others. This is actually a huge business nowadays. Even with the now very popular, set of exploits and malware called ransomware, right? So these organized crimes are actually making a lot of money. And there's also state-sponsored and governments, right? And these are interested in, of course, stealing data, including intellectual property and research and development data from many major government agencies, manufacturers, and defense contractors, right? And we also have Hacktivist, which are the people that actually carry out cybersecurity attacks aimed at promoting a social or political cause, right? So basically these are protesting against something, right, for political or social motives, right? And then we have the terrorist groups, and they're motivated by political or religious beliefs as well. Organizations need to have capabilities to define, build, orchestrate, manage, and monitor the different operational processes and workflows. And this is actually achieved by implementing runbooks and Runbooks Automation, otherwise known as RBA. Now, a runbook is a collection of procedures and operations performed by system administrators, security professionals, or network operators. There are different runbooks metrics that can help you and your organization, to actually be successful, right? So, things like mean time to repair, or MTTR, right? So how long is actually taking you to, react, and not only react, but of course mitigate and remediate a security attack. Also, you can measure mean time between failures, right? You can measure things like mean time to discover a security incident. How long actually does it take you to just discover that there's a security incident, within your organization? Mean time to actually contain or mitigate the security incident, as we've actually mentioned before, and automating the provisioning of IT resources as well. Now, there are many different commercial and open source runbook automation solutions in the industry. An example of a popular open source RBA solution is Rundeck, and I'm actually showing the link here is rundeck.org. You can actually get more information and download that open source solution or software. Now, Rundeck can be integrated with configuration management platforms such as Chef, Puppet, and also Ansible. Now, a commercial RBA is the Cisco Workload Automation, or CWA, which can manage different businesses' processes across a comprehensive set of applications and systems, right? You can obtain more information about, Cisco CWA at the link that I'm showing here. Engineering is the methodology for acquiring architectural information about anything originally created by someone else. Reverse engineering has been around since long before computers or modern technology. So nowadays, reverse engineering is not only used to steal or counterfeit technology and reverse cryptographic algorithms, but it's also used to perform malware analysis and cybersecurity forensics by the good guys as well, right? So reverse engineering can even be useful to software developers to discover how to interoperate with undocumented or partially documented software, or even to develop competent software, right? So, which in some cases actually may be illegal, right? So the use of reverse engineering is to actually steal somebody else's intellectual property is definitely illegal. Reverse engineering can be used for exploit development to locate vulnerabilities in a system and then compromise such system. But it's also used to reverse engineer malware, right? To see how malware actually is behaving, right? So security researchers and forensics experts can actually trace every step the malware takes and assess the damage that actually it could cause, right? The expected rate of infection as well is another thing that they actually measure, and how it could be removed from the infected systems, right? Reverse engineering also help on finding out how to potentially proactively defend against such malware and such threats, right? So malware analysis extend to identifying that the malware is present on a given system and studying the malware to understand how it functions. Doing that can reveal the purpose of the malware and even the author of the malware in some cases, right? So because in some scenarios you can determine if a specific technique is actually being used, whether it's actually an amateur or perhaps a more sophisticated developer, and in some cases folks with a lot of resources, like in the case of fairly large crime organizations and also nation states. Right. So there are two additional uses for reverse engineering, right? One is to reverse cryptographic algorithms, and that's actually used to decrypt data. And the second one is to reverse DRM, right, or digital rights management solutions. And that's where the threat actors use DRM reverse engineering techniques to steal things like music, movies, books, and any other contents actually protected by DRM solutions. Now, there are many tools available to perform reverse engineering, right? So I'm including a few here. The first example is system monitoring tools, which are tools that actually sniff, monitor, explore, and otherwise actually expose the program being reversed, right? The next ones are actually disassemblers, right? So these are tools that take a program's executable binary as input and then generate textual files that contain the assembly language code for the entire programs or parts of the program, right? So then we also have debuggers, right? And debuggers allow reverse engineers to observe the program while it's actually running, right? And they're actually able to set what we call breakpoints. And then, that allows them to have the ability to trace, throughout the code to actually, use these debuggers to step through the disassembled code and watch the system as it runs as it runs actually the program, one instruction at a time, right? And then we also have decompilers, right? So programs actually that take an executable binary file and then attempts to produce readable high-level language code from those executables.